Fora TV. The world is thinking.
So let's jump right into Stencil Nation. And again, welcome. Thank you for showing up. I will read maybe for about the next 6 slides. I'm going to read from the introduction that's in the book. The book has maybe about 500 photographs, maybe about 14,000 words, little mini essays, a tips section from the artists themselves, and then like bibliography in the back, research in the back. So I'm going to read from the introduction, edited version, and then we'll just move right along into the what I call Stencil 101, ways that we talk about stencils, ways that we make stencils, and the history of stencils. So again, thanks for coming. A newly discovered country exists without borders, leaders, and ironclad laws. Its citizens carry no official identification. The paint stains on clothes and hands, or a camera for photographing an alley wall, stand as informal documents of citizenship. This land has no military defense. Its only protection is a good hiding place for a piece of cutout material and a spray can, and extra pairs of eyes looking out for the police. To become a member of this nation, one only has to think up an idea, put it on a piece of paper or plastic, cut it out, and paint it somewhere. Another path to citizenship originates with those who appreciate the painted art, seek it out, document it, and enjoy a fresh alternative to mainstream urban culture. Since the 1970s and maybe earlier, the ambiguous boundaries of this stencil nation have woven together into a unique early 21st century art form. With roots going back thousands of years, this body of people has finally united and together push and pull at the interpretations of graffiti, art, commerce, politics, and language. Unified via medium, yet with different visions, stencil artists and fans confront problems and complexities through a rich landscape of spray-painted possibilities. In cities, on the streets, the ironies and contradictions of our times are summed up in simple images, often with a bit of text, stirring emotions and begging questions. The artists of this nation work quietly yet speak loudly from the dark urban landscapes. Their visions are sometimes accepted by members of the cultural mainstream, who may express interest by paying for a piece of a citizen's work. Galleries and museums have noticed the power of this community's voices and visions, and their walls reflect their newly acquired tastes. Yet Stencil Nation continues to take the do-it-yourself ethic to heart and build unique community frameworks around the shared culture. These attempts to wall in and commodify the free-form nature of stencils continue to spread the grassroots concepts from which the art form originated. Stencil Nation, graffiti, community, and art attempts to take these emotions and connections and share them with others who may or may not know about the art form. Artists, documenters, and fans from the communities present their own perspectives on stencil art, offering insight and creativity that may help someone fall in love with the art of negative space while enriching appreciation for it as well. So that is the introduction. And how I have this, the beginning of this presentation set up is as an introduction to stencil art. Who here doesn't know much about stencils? A couple of people? Yeah, a couple of people. Okay. So so we'll start out with Stencil Basics, which I have set up as some words. That photograph right there, that's Logan Hicks. He's an artist in Brooklyn, does gallery work, really, really large pieces. We'll see some more of his work on the presentation. He is holding a stencil. And a stencil is actually 3 things. I'm about to show a lot of words. But basically, he is holding a stencil. This is a stencil that I made in Berlin in January. And basically, there are 2 other things that are stencils. There's the action of putting a pigment through this stencil, which is the cutout. That is the verb. You're stenciling. And then when you have this like laying on a surface and you put spray paint through it, which you're laying a stencil down on a surface and then you're stenciling, you're putting pigment through it. When you take the cutout off, the image that you leave behind is a stencil. So the really easy short way to remember this is to make a stencil, you stencil a stencil. There are two parts of a stencil, really, just two basic parts. The first part are the bridges, and I'll put the words up here. But basically, this circle right here on the stencil that I made in January, if I just cut all of it out, all of that circle out, then it would have fallen off of the piece of paper. So you have to literally create these little pieces of paper right here called bridges to hold that circle in. And this is like one of the magic tricks of making a stencil. With other types of art forms that use negative space, like screen printing, you don't have to worry about that. And then basically what it is holding together are the islands of negative space. So again, these are the islands, what you can see through, what you can see Logan through. You're looking at Logan's face through the islands of negative space. And of course, he's really done a great job at hiding the bridges. So that's it, the basics. You might hear me say that throughout the presentation. Also, if you read the book, you'll definitely see that. Continuing with some words. These are a little more secondary words. This is a stencil on the sidewalks of San Francisco by an artist named Claire Kuda Bandersnitch. And basically what she did one day was she got a can of black spray paint and she had a stencil of this woman, and it looks like a little dog beside her. And she went out and she got up. These are graffiti terms. Come on in, sit down. You haven't missed anything. So these are graffiti terms. So basically, when you're spray painting out in the streets, these are some of the words that are used. You go out and you get up, or you bomb the streets, or you hit a wall. And then say that the stencil that Claire left on the sidewalk, someone who had a storefront nearby didn't like it. Well, they'd get a bucket of gray paint and they could paint over it if they wanted to. And that is called the buff. So when you see the beautiful rectangles or the crazy like 4 or 5 layers of different colors on a wall or something, then you know that that people in that neighborhood or the city's coming by and they're buffing the walls. And then you have a few other techniques. This clutch vinyl right here, this is he's got some drips on this one. And then with the Eclair photograph, if you see the black haze, on the left, that is overspray. And overspray is an effect you get with a stencil and a spray can. And so there are 3 ways, like if you're walking around your neighborhood and you see something that you think might be a stencil, there are 3 ways to check. One is to look for overspray, like Eclair, like that piece. Another one is to look for the bridges and the islands, because stencils almost always have the bridges. So again, Eclair has done a pretty good job hiding the bridges, but if you look like around the neck, you can kind of see how the circle doesn't go all the way through. It stops. That's a bridge. And then we have some other, like even tertiary, 3rd level words that are used online and in the community. And these are just different words for spray cans and stickers and photographs. So in my introduction, I said very simply how to make a stencil. This is the one slide that gives you the 3 steps once again. This is a photograph from Italy. It's a bike office, much like the bike kitchen that we have here in San Francisco. And so Herzog wanted to make a stencil. So his first step was he thought up an idea. As you can see, he took a skull and a bike tool, and he put it down on what looks like a shelving paper, some kind of wax paper. And then step 2, he got that X-Acto knife that you see in that photograph, and he basically cut the skull and the bike tool out. And again, looking for the bridges and the islands. You can tell that obviously he's not going out into the streets or anything with this because the skull, the right side of the skull, isn't really connected to that straight vertical line. So it's a pretty delicate stencil because of that. This is the second step, cutting out stencils. That's the trick. It takes a lot of practice. The masters, as you'll see in the photographs that I'm going to show in the presentation, like there are some people that just really, really have the knowledge down on how to like cut these stencils out, and it takes hours and hours. And then step three takes a while and also takes some skill as well. He got that roller, and it looks like Herzog was maybe making patches, so maybe he was using fabric paint and rolling fabric paint down. The spray can is obviously the medium of choice, the pigment of choice, airbrush, bleach. There are like many other things that you can also use, fabric paint. You can use a lot of other things as well with stencils. So that's how you make a stencil, very briefly. So moving right along into the history, continuing the introduction, this is Stencil History 101. This is basically where things come from. A lot of people, at least before I wrote my book, a lot of people thought that stencils began with Banksy in 2002. Actually, stencils are very old. This isn't the oldest stencil location. Argentina actually has the third oldest stencil location. This is just a photograph that was in my book. Argentina actually has 2 books just on Argentinian stencils alone, and they have a very deep, rich history as well, just their own stencil history. It's pretty amazing. But of course, like a lot of technology that we know here in the 21st century, the stencil, this thing that looks like this, it started mostly in China. The technology really got worked out in China. This is a Buddhist stencil right here. Buddhist monks who were artists would go from monastery to monastery, temple to temple, and they would have this stencil with them, and they would use a process called stencil and pounce. It's a sign-making process. It's still in use today. It hasn't completely become extinct. But you basically take a little bag of powder and you hold this stencil template up on the wall, and you tap the powder around, and it has little holes in the image, and then when you take it off the wall, you have this stenciled image that you can now paint. And so the tool, I guess, went from China to Japan. Japan spent a long time refining it, and then of course Europe came into contact with Japan and discovered stencils as well, and then they ended up in France. So again, this is just kind of like the short history. There are like little incidents here and there between all of this, but the height of modern stenciling as we know it was in the 1920s in Paris, and they had at least 600 people working in factories with stencils. They had 10 stencils and making like these beautiful books. This is actually a photograph from a book, and of course, screen printing basically put stencil industry out of business because screen printing is much easier to do and screens are much easier to work with. But of course, everybody nowadays knows about stencils because of stencils in the streets. And then here are just a few examples of some of the 20th century influences of stencils in the streets. The photograph on the far left is from the 1920s. It is what's called a Rasta Windows poster series. And in the Soviet Union, they had poster series that they would put in windows for propaganda purposes, for communication purposes, and some of the artists in those collectives were stencil artists. And then it's good to be on the Haight Ashbury neighborhood and talk about the Diggers poster, which is the second poster right there. Those 2 Chinese assassins that were put in that poster were stenciled. It would be interesting to find an original of that poster. If anybody here knows, that would be great. And then not in the book, but always interesting to me, the first Grateful Dead logo ever, the lightning bolt logo, Bear Owsley actually cut out a stencil. And you know there's the blue side and the red side. Well, he did the blue side with the stencil, let it dry, and then just turned the stencil over and did the red side. and that's his toolbox. That's the first 1969 logo. And then stencils have a very rich history of being a voice of the oppressed, or the voice of the voiceless in the streets. So here are two examples in Chile and Poland, both in the 1980s, both artists risking their lives speaking out against the dictatorships in their countries. And then, of course, a lot of people know about stencils through the punk movement, the late 1970s punk scenes. A lot of these stencils in this slide came out of there. Crass Collective, maybe one of the more famous stencil images, their logo. G. Voscher, I got in contact with her for my timeline. I have a 4-page chronology in the book. And she said after every gig, they would take their stencils and they would go out into the neighborhood and pick billboards, and they would spray paint billboards. And then we have Anton van Dalen and Black Lerat, who were contemporaries in the early 1980s doing stencils almost over, I don't know, it's very interesting. It's almost instantaneously, even like San Francisco, Baltimore, Paris, and New York, people almost instantly started stenciling in the early 1980s. And again, I think the punk scene had a lot to do with that. And then finally, Seth Tabachman from World War III Illustrated. That's one of the more famous stencils from the 1980s. Actually, when I came to San Francisco in 1997, I saw that in the streets in the Mission District as a stencil. So moving right along, continuing a little more history, I've got some bullet point slides coming up with a lot of text with some extracurricular things as well. But I'm going to show you this photograph first. That is a 35,000-year-old stencil. This is not in the book. This is obviously mentioned in the chronology in the book. But National Geographic had this great photograph. And basically what the ancient humans did back in the Ice Age was they would put some kind of rock pigment. They would crush up a rock or some kind of make a natural pigment, and then they would add water, make it into an ink, and then they would put it in their mouths and either use a straw or just their mouths as a propellant, as a force of propelling, and then they would put their hand on the rock face and spray the pigment over their hand. And then, of course, you take the hand away, and that is the negative image, the negative space image. In Australia, 3 different continents. So in Australia, South America, and Europe, hand stencils appeared. In Australia, the Aboriginals also did boomerangs and axes. There was a joke made before the presentation that how come they didn't do profiles of their faces, and I can only imagine that the pigment doesn't feel good in your eye. I don't know, it was a long time ago, who knows? So here we go with the bullet points. You may wonder why I have a shadow puppet image in this slide. For the chronology, I was very interested in what I call the cousins of negative space. And of course, in China, someone's figured out how to cut out figures. And instead of putting a pigment through the negative space, you're putting light through it. So there you go, shadow puppets. Another thing I was interested in was also the spray can technology, how that developed. So here you'll see a couple of bullet points about in the 1700s, people trying to figure out how to pressurize things in bottles. And then, of course, there's a cut paper technique that began in China and was developed in Germany. Also Mexico, if you ever celebrate or know about Day of the Dead, you know that they have like cut paper images that they put out as well. So they have a rich history of that. Kara Walker is on this slide because here in the United States, she is the master of the silhouette cutout. Mistress of the silhouette cutout. And then finally, one more slide full of bullet points. In 1949, Edward Seymour, he is the #1 spray can hero. He figured out how to put pigment in a can and propel it without it being a total mess. So we have a lot of debt to thank to him. Yeah, that's why I have those cute little toys there. One last thing about this slide, that bullet point from the 1930s, that is one of the earlier instances of stencil protesting that I could find, and it was in Argentina was a Mexican muralist using chyme and nitrocellulose-filled insecticide sprayers. No spray cans back then. All right, so we're moving into the pictures, the photos from the book. I basically call this this is the teaser presentation, because these photographs are beautiful, a lot of great art in all these photos, and you're only getting a little taste, you're getting a little drop. If I crammed hundreds of photographs in here, we'd be here all night. So these are the Aerosol Pioneers. These are the folks that influenced Banksy, or at least influenced a lot of us, a lot of the artists that are doing stencils today. We'll start with John Fechner. In the 1970s, he started taking spray cans and cutting out big, huge stencils of words. He called it single word poetry, and he is the master of locations. One of the things, again, one of the things that makes Banksy so good. There are a lot of things that make his stencil art really good, but one thing is he picks a very clever location most of the time, and so John Fechner was always about locations. He was really good at picking locations. Early liberated billboard there from 1980. He mostly worked in the New York area, and he's a musician predominantly. He's not a stencil artist really. And then in Paris, in France, again in the 1980s, Blek Lerat started stenciling. He just had a book come out last year, and is almost instantaneously, he was stenciling, and then literally there were at least 15, 20 other people doing stencils. Jeff Aerosol, I featured as one of the Aerosol Pioneers, and this is a photograph from he and his work in 1985, and he is still stenciling today. And he's one of the godfathers. So that's a piece from 2006. That is on a piece of paper. So basically in his studio, he's done like this beautiful 2-4 color piece. And when you do stencils on paper, you can roll it up in a tube and you can hop a bus. You don't have to worry about bending up your stencils, or you don't have to worry about them sticking together. And then when you go into the town, you just mix up a little wheat paste and put them up. So again, in the early 1980s, all of these artists were seeing punks with totally destroyed clothing. They would stencil their clothes. Punk bands would come through town promoting their shows. They would stencil the streets promoting their shows, promoting their bands. Scott Williams here in San Francisco was noticing all of that. And there was an artist here, a punk artist here named Cara Crash, and she was making stencils, and she kind of gave him the basics, and he just instantly became obsessed. This is one of his early pieces. He is still stenciling today. He lives down in the Mission District. He's doing one-of-a-kind books. He works with airbrush. He inhaled a little too much spray paint over the decades and doesn't like the smell of it anymore. That's what he says. So this is an airbrush piece. It's really small. This is probably only about like 15 inches tall. But he is one of the great examples of the mad, obsessed stencil artist. Again, we don't just take a pencil and write an illustration on a piece of paper. We spend hours and hours cutting these things out, and then we think about spray painting them or putting pigment through them. It's just a different process, often laborious. Some of Scott's work here, it's a little more simple, but still just crazy stuff. I was also tipped off in San Francisco that activist here in San Francisco, Diaz Black, he had been photographing graffiti since the 1980s, for decades. So I tracked him down and started asking him nicely if he could submit some photographs from the 1980s and 1990s for the book. And so he went through actual slides and found a slide scanner and actually scanned some up for me. This is from 1989. Yes, yeah, he's still photographing graffiti. He does all kinds. I think he does like the concrete scrawls. He photographs all kinds of stuff. And a lot of times he puts his feet in for scale, so you can have an idea of how big the piece is, especially if it's on the ground. And this is from 1990 from the first Iraq War. Still ringing true today. So the next section that we'll go into are the artists themselves, featured artists, maybe about a dozen. This section is going to be in alphabetical order with 2 artists per slide. So we'll start off with Adam 5100 and Amy Rice. Adam is an artist here in San Francisco as well. And I love, every time I see this slide, I love the fact that these 2 photographs are together because, again, they're using the same tools. They're using cutout stencils and spray paint. But they have very different ways of expressing themselves with pictures. Adam's always got shows around. He's always doing art exhibits and all. So if you're interested in checking that out, his website's in the book and easy to find on the internet. And then we have Aerofish and Banksy. Very similar styles. They're both from the UK, of course. But Aerofish has a more activist angle on it. He actually went through a phase where he was going into war zones doing stencils. This one's from Lebanon. I also have photographs from Iraq and from Palestine as well. And kind of sketchy being a stencil artist in militarized areas. I don't know if you're reading the quote, but his stencil was in a tube and he realized that it looked like a missile launcher, and there were like snipers and towers above him, and he decided to walk behind a bush to like unroll his stencil up. He had no idea if he would get shot or killed. And then of course Banksy, everyone knows about Banksy. Again, he adds all the elements together. He adds the politics of it, the illegality of it, the location of the image, and he just has a crazy sense of humor that it seems like everybody pretty much gets all of his funny jokes. And then we have Christine and Howze. This book, this stencil on this book cover right here is from Christine. And he has this very populist angle on doing stencil art and doing art in general. He just recently started doing exhibits, gallery shows. Howze is one of the last true die-hard, hardcore punk stencil artists. He keeps it real. He doesn't use computers. He doesn't do the photorealistic thing. He has this really tribal tattoo style, freehand style, and he just cuts stencils out of it. And last I heard, he doesn't really do shows. He just keeps it real in the street. And then we have Janet Bike Girl and Clutch. Janet Bike Girl, one of the more obsessed stencil artists who likes doing bicycles. Her goal in life is to try to make a stencil of every style of bike ever invented. And of course, now there are folks all across the world tricking out bikes and making tall bikes and chopper bikes, and so she's a little behind. And then Clutch, this is the photograph on the slide. This is you see the drips in the background. So he's got the drips down, and he's a skateboarder. He doesn't ride a bike. Logan Hicks in M City. Logan Hicks, one of the masters of the photorealistic stencil style. He works very large. I mean, like his pieces are like 10 feet across, 6 feet tall. Crazy stencil work. When you look really close, like his bridge work, the bridges, the way that he cuts it out, it's just, he's just got this very unique style. Totally amazing to see his original artwork. M City in Poland, they use modular stencils, and they make really nice cityscapes. We're going to see another photograph from them further in the presentation. And then we have Pete Walliger and Pixnit. They have really unique illustrative styles. So Pete Walliger, for me, it's in the eyes. You always know it's a Pete stencil because of the eyes. And he's got this crazy thing where, like, this is Keith Haring, right? So when he did this mural in Art Basel in Miami, he actually dressed up like Keith Haring. And he looked a lot like, it's crazy. And he had a luchador phase where he was doing stenciling wrestling mask. And of course, he's got this whole luchador costume that he wears when he does the shows. Pixnit, she calls it urban beautification. She creates these beautiful ornamental illustrations and then cuts them out as a stencil and then finds ugly pieces of concrete to stencil them on. Makes things pretty. And then Kim McCarthy and the Street Art Workers. Some of you may know about the Street Art Workers because a lot of times their posters show up here in San Francisco. It's just a clandestine group of artist activists who submit artwork to an address for a theme, and the theme for this one was corporate-owned telecommunications. And then the art gets redistributed. It gets collated and redistributed back to the artist, and then you get like 10, 12 different pieces that you can put up in your city. And then finally, the last slide of featured artist, Swoon and Tiago. Swoon is another amazing artist. I don't know if any of you know her work, but she works with more of the cutout paper technique. But she does accent her stencils accent her cutouts with stencils. So as you see with the little red butterflies, the little red flowers, those are actual stencils. She has pieces up all around San Francisco. 15th and Julian, there's an alleyway behind that church that has some of her work. 25th and Mission, there's a beautiful, like huge, like 10 feet long, maybe 10 feet tall, beautiful Day of the Dead influenced piece that's up there, and there are a couple of other places. Ask me, I'll tell you. And then Tiago, another bicycle artist. He's a professional zoo bomber, if that actually exists. That might be an ironic phrase, but he's deep in the outlaw bike scene up in Portland, and so he makes a lot of really great stencils about bikes. I have a couple of his works on vinyl here, and then I have one of his stickers right here. Oh, and then this little teddy bear, that's his piece. So I mentioned Diaz Black as an early documentarian. A lot of the stencil books that are out today don't really feature the people that photograph them, and I consider them important citizens of Stencil Nation. So I reached out to some people that love to photograph stencils and asked if I could present their work, and these are some of the examples. This is David Drexler in Madison, Wisconsin. David is a musician. He's not a stencil artist, but of course, after every thaw, after every winter thaw, up there when it's springtime in Madison, people start making stencils, and he likes photographing them. And then in the United Kingdom, we have Duncan Cumming. He is a stencil artist, but he also just has this amazing website on the internet, just full of graffiti, not just stencil graffiti, but full of graffiti. He has a lot of Banksy's works represented on there. He is one of the main documenters of Banksy's stuff, and here are some examples from him. And then up in Canada, we have Martin Rees, who is a professional photographer. Fortunate for him because he always has a camera. He's always walking around with a camera. When he became friends with Janet Bike Girl, she basically, he realized what a stencil was, and then just when he was riding his bike around Toronto, started noticing them everywhere. And then Maya, World of Stencils. I do not know her last name. She never gave me her last name. She lived in Barcelona for a while, and for a time Barcelona was just deep in all kinds of urban street art. Stencils everywhere. The mayor just basically announced that it was a low priority to go after people painting art on the walls, and so art flourished there, and that doesn't really exist anymore. The new mayor is kind of cracked down on that. So I don't quite know what Maya does for a living, but she loved photographing stencils for a while, and she traveled around Europe specifically to meet artists and to photograph stencils. And then finally, the final documentarian that I feature is Thomas Mueller. He is a professional scene painter for the movie industry in Germany, and he's an older gentleman, but all of a sudden there was a community, a really tight community of artists in Hamburg, Germany, and he fell in with them, and they encouraged him to start making stencils. So he started making stencils, and of course, whenever they get up on the walls, they give him a call, and they're like, hey, Thomas, you should take a walk by this building, and he'll photograph it. He has a great website with literally hundreds. Like he might have he might have thousands at this point, thousands of photographs. So the subtitle of the book is Graffiti, Community, and Art. One of the intriguing things about stencil art, to me at least, is it has kind of, I mean, there are no written rules, of course, but it has kind of a different social structure than a lot of graffiti does. You don't really have, in traditional graffiti, you know, some crews of artists will like own a wall, and so another crew will go by and go over that wall, and then there'll be a beef, which is, you know, they'll have like a kind of you know, get angry with each other, and then they'll just go around town just crossing out the other crew's artwork everywhere. In stencil art, you don't really get that. In stencil art, if one ends up on a wall or on the sidewalk, then somebody comes along and will add to it. And, you know, if you don't contain it or buff it, the next thing you know, you'll have something that looks like that. But I should definitely let you know that this was a show that Banksy did in 2008 before my book went to press. It was called the Cannes Festival, and he took over a derelict part of a tube station somewhere in London, and he had like all these amazing artists like Logan Hicks and Pure Evil and Banksy himself, all of these amazing artists who are doing really well in the art scene with stencil work. He had them do like huge murals, but then they opened the show up for the public, and anyone could stencil on the wall or the ground. And this is just a great example. One of the few rules that he had was you can't go over someone else's art. Again, you know, it's just one of the unique things about stencil art. That's the M-City piece I was telling you about, the big bulldozer right there. So, you know, obviously you think about it, I mean, it does have like there's a lot of hip-hop, traditional graffiti influence in the stencil scene, but I think it's the punk aesthetic, the DIY community aesthetic, the fact that stencil art has always been used for protest throughout the decades. I think a lot of that makes it more of a community vibe. This is a Romanian magazine that I got in the mail. PDF that was sent to me featuring stencils, and I had to put this spread in the presentation because if you can't read the bottom, it was a camp. 90 people joined forces to achieve the highest draft anime stencils ever. That was actually what they said in the book, in the magazine. And then these are great photographs. These are like the photographs of people like, I actually asked the editor of this magazine, I was like, why anime? And he was like, we love anime in Romania. It's like we're obsessed with it. That and stencils, totally obsessed. I was like, I get it. They actually have anime festival in Romania, and like thousands of people from all over the country will come to it. So here in San Francisco, around 2003, things were really blowing up. I started a website called stencilarchive.org in 2002, and soon after that, a website called Stencil Revolution started, and that was based out of Australia. And almost overnight, Stencil Revolution, they had like a great architecture. You could just easily upload photographs. And so almost overnight, everybody in the Northern Hemisphere at least knew what was going on in Australia, and then we knew what was going on in London. So Stephen Lambert was doing a project called the Budget Gallery back then. So we decided to do this crazy stencil show and to sell art cheap on the walls, silent auction, no minimum, super cheap artwork. And it was just all for fun and community. So this mural, which is barely in existence, there are remnants of it now. This mural had about 8 artists. We had a telephone booth that was buffed, and anybody could come in and add to it. We had a table where you could cut out your own stencil. The sidewalks were free for anybody to stencil as well. It was a lot of fun. Clutch had vinyl in the show that he had stenciled, and he came to the opening and was very impressed. So he went back up to Portland and started a show called Vinyl Killers. And it started out in 2003 as stencils on vinyl only, but now it's any kind of graffiti art on vinyl. Now there are online galleries selling stencils on vinyl. There's a gallery in France that sells stencil on vinyl. There are artists literally making a living off of selling stencils on vinyl. It's kind of a crazy thing now. And of course, he's done about 6 vinyl killers since then. And then finally, another event that I featured in the book was the Diffusor Festival. And again, in Barcelona, they got a community arts center and buffed all the walls around it, and then they just put an open call out for artists from around the world to come and stencil. And they showed videos, and they had workshops, and they had talks. But again, the main thing that they really enjoyed were the artists got together and unrolled all their stencils, and they're like, "What can we do together? Let's work something out." So all these beautiful murals got worked out because of that. And then finally, just one more crazy photograph from the Cannes Festival. That's just wild. Okay, so now we're getting into the homework section. This is an assignment I'm giving all of you. This is we're going to take 10 minutes now. I'm going to pass out pencils, and I'm going to get you to write essays on what is art. No one's squirming. Oh, good. No, that was a joke. That was a joke. You never know who's going to come out to the presentation, so I have this special section in this for this presentation to basically make people think about art. What is art? And of course, artwork. What is art depends on who you ask or whom you ask. And some of these slides are going to kind of give you different things to think about. So again, what is art? Well, the silhouette of the guy with the balloon, that is a Parisian stencil artist named Nemo, and he's been around since the 1980s, and he does these beautiful, almost comic book poetic images. Is that art? I don't know. That was illegal. He did that on the wall illegally. I don't know. That next photograph, Donald Rumsfeld making Guantanamo prisoners disco. It's black spray paint. It's on the sidewalk. It's very political. It might offend people. Is that art? I don't know. It probably took that person a good 5 hours to cut that out. I don't know. Again, thinking about that question, looking at these two photographs together, that's that photograph from Argentina, the cave stencils. The photograph beside it is from Howze Lane in Melbourne, Australia. Seems kind of similar to me when I put these photographs together. Human beings leaving their mark, human beings trying to communicate something, trying to create some kind of new language or narrative. Very intriguing to me. So obviously, people have different opinions about art, about graffiti. One conclusion that I came to when I was writing the essay for this section was basically, no matter what you think about it, I think humans will always want to take a knife out and carve their initials in the tree, or like Banksy. These are photographs of Banksy putting artwork up in major museums around. Well, he did Paris and he did London and New York. He went into the major museums and snuck his own artwork in. So this is like a very 21st century, post-Fordist, postmodern expression of doing that hand stencil. And Banksy, of course, has great opinion about it. If you're reading that slide. And then finally, the last slide from the essay section of what is art. Two artists. I just found out who this artist is. The artist that did this Indian stencil, his name is Burner. This no parking sign was in Clarion Alley, and I took this photograph, and of course, soon afterwards, that sign was stolen. And if you start processing the theft of that sign, then you can only think, okay, that's all illegal artwork on that parking sign. Somebody took the parking sign off of it, probably hanging on their wall somewhere. It's art. It's artwork. Or in a gallery, exactly. Maybe in a gallery. And then this is the photograph on the right is an artist named Banksy. And Banksy is totally making fun of the buff, he's got the city worker buffing the spray tag, and then of course the city worker is being buffed as well. He's buffed. And that's a stencil. The city worker is a stencil. So after thinking about that question, we'll just move right into stencil graffiti. I broke stencil graffiti down into certain themes, and then one of the great things about stencil art are the way that people interact with it. Again, the other types of graffiti people don't necessarily interact with as much, but here are two photographs from the section Buffed, Covered, Crossed, and Ripped. And Gay Shame is a local organization here in San Francisco, and apparently someone was not happy with their stencil, so they got a pencil out and colored pencil and drew a big X over it, thus breaking the law. I mean, defacing property. The stencil, the two wheat paste of Jeff's Aerosol, he did not do the rips. He actually came back to photograph those wheat paste a day later, and someone had tried to take them off the wall. And of course, it begs the question: it's like, well, did they like it and want it? Were they totally offended by it and did they not want it on the wall? I don't know. They look kind of pretty too. And then other ways to interact with stencils. I call this section the conversations section. Some of you may know that red stencil might look familiar to you. About 2 Julys ago, there was a group of artists called The Strangers that put about 50 stencils up around the Mission District. And it was called a story, actually, interactive story called She Loves the Moon. And it was about a woman who breaks up with her boyfriend because she falls in love with the moon. And it had about 3 endings. The stencils were just all over the place. Scott Williams called me a couple of times and he was like, there's this stencil with an arrow on 20th and Cap. And so I go to 20th and Cap, and I'm like, I start following the arrows and photographing the stencils, and literally 4 endings. There's a side story with a mouse and an owl who go off on a little adventure. One ending is up above Dolores Park on 20th, up the hill, up the stairs. You take 20th like all the way up the stairs, and one of the endings is there. One of the endings has the man getting on his bicycle at Mission and 16th and getting hit by a car. Crazy stuff, fun stuff. And also too, when you're looking for stencils in the wild, you can find them 2 different ways. You can find them horizontally, which is the preferred method here in San Francisco on the sidewalk. New York City has had a lot of sidewalk works over the decades too. And then vertical placement, which in the 1980s, that was how Black and all the folks in France, they were getting up on the walls vertically. So of course, with the title Stencil Nation, I'd have to take you on a geography tour for the presentation, but this is the special psychogeography tour. And if you aren't familiar with that term, it is a situationist term from the 1960s in France. And basically, psychogeography includes just about anything that takes pedestrians off their predictable paths and jolts them into a new awareness of the urban landscape. So for anyone who appreciates stencils in the urban wilds, like I do, I mean, I find myself standing on dumpsters in alleyways. I was just in Davis, and I climbed up by the train tracks to photograph a stencil. You find very interesting parts of the world when you're looking for stencils. These cities are in alphabetical order, so we will start off with Black Rock City, which is Burning Man. And believe it or not, stencils are up and around in Black Rock City, and of course you only have 1 week to find them and photograph them. And oddly enough, they have a graffiti problem there, and hip-hop culture has slowly, progressively gotten bigger and bigger at Burning Man, and of course one of the pillars of hip-hop is graffiti. So yeah, I don't know how they're handling that right now, but you aren't supposed to tag other people's art, but that's, no rules in graffiti. Montreal, considered a backwater to some, doesn't have its own book or anything showing the street art, but I featured it, and I like the fact that it's a bilingual city, so you get French and English stencils. And then continuing that tradition of voice of the voiceless, of using stencils as a tool to protest oppression. In Oaxaca recently, the last 2 years, the people there had a big falling out with their governor. And so a lot of stencil groups formed and went out into the streets stenciling against the governor. The piece with the woman with the gun, that is actually rice. That is a rice stencil. And then, of course, San Francisco. I've been photographing stencils in San Francisco since 1997. My website, stencilarchive.org, has a huge section of San Francisco stencils from over the years. So I had to put it in the book. That's a swoon piece on the wall on the old police station on Valencia Street. Very long gone. And then, of course, one more slide since it's San Francisco. Above, if anybody doesn't know, Above, he's pretty well known for throwing arrows over wires around the world. I caught this sticker in 2003. He's from San Francisco, but I don't know if he's been back. He's literally been on the road for like 2 or 3 years. And then Asia. Asia doesn't have a lot of work featured in any of the books that have been coming out. So here's a section from Taipei. And then another section from Tel Aviv. And then finally, another section from Tokyo, Japan. Tokyo just had, I believe, a street art book come out recently, if you're interested in that. So coming to the end of the presentation, we'll just get into other ways that I tried to feature stencil work. And basically, I broke it down into media, basically things that citizens stencil upon. And we'll start first off, though, featuring the cutouts themselves. None of the books, really, that are out feature the actual cutouts. And, of course, they are artwork in and of themselves. They're a tool and they're artwork. That crazy piece on the left, that is a hand-drawn, hand-cut Scott Williams piece. And then here are 2 more cutouts. That's a Jeff Aerosol piece. You're looking through the trees in his backyard. That's the big, huge island of negative space. And then, of course, you can stencil on fabric. That green shirt, that piece on the green shirt, that's an artist named Zavi who lives in the Bay Area. And you can stencil just random things that you find in the gutters or thrown away. That's community thrift there on the left, back in the background. If you can't read the chair, what's on the chair, it says it's never as bad as it seems. And then Julie Shields, she even if she knew about John Fechner or not, she took a note from his book, from his style, and she went around her neighborhood in Melbourne and did these really funny sentences on furniture. You can also go large with stencils. There are examples of that. Both of these pieces were in San Francisco. They're both gone. Emma Goldman was out on the ground at Tyre Beach. There was also a Kafka piece beside it. And then an artist named Combat did this piece at Palazzo Gallery at 18th and Mission, the new location. And of course, that's been painted over. And you can also stencil on paper. I've been talking about that a good bit. That's another photograph from the old police station on Valencia Street there on the left. And then close-ups, 1 piece of vinyl per photograph for the stencils on vinyl section. And stickers, stencils on stickers. It's always a fun thing. It's one reason I always have stickers available at my shows to give away, because there's this whole subgenre in the street art world of stickers, vinyl stickers. I mean, I guess you could thank Shepard Fairey for that, because the Obey stickers are literally everywhere. I was in an airport restroom recently, and I just looked by the hand dryer, and there was an Obey sticker in the airport. I guess they don't have cameras in the bathrooms. And then finally, stencils on wooden canvas. And initially, this section was really one of the last parts of the book that I created and included. and I specifically did it to feature the artist of the policewoman there. His name is Niles, and he was 14 when he made that piece. And again, you know, if you're thinking about community, you think about the guys like Scott Williams, Black Larat, all of those folks who have been stenciling for almost 30 years. And then you think about folks like me who got started like in the late 90s. And then you think about the 14-year-olds who are all out there with their X-Acto knives cutting stencils. So much respect to the next generation of Stencil Nation. I'll end the presentation with tips that Niles left. He submitted to the book, and they're cool. I like them. They make me laugh and they make me think. So here are his 5 favorite tips about stencil art. Tip number 1: draw a stencil every day. For people that don't make stencils, that's a lot of work. Tip number 2: don't listen to your parents. They'll understand eventually. I like that one. Tip number 3: you don't need fancy-ass paint to be an artist. Of course, I'm still a newbie on the spray paint scene, but I've been schooled I've been on tour since June, and a lot of artists have schooled me on the really good paint, but it's expensive. So, you know, buy the cheap stuff. Buy the $2 cans first before you buy the expensive stuff. Tip number 4, and this is my favorite, and if there is a homework assignment, this is the homework assignment for all of you: look for graffiti. Not too hard to find in San Francisco. And then finally, tip number 5, try to imagine things as stencils. So there you go. That is your homework. Please, you have 2 days to turn it in. My email's on my business card. You will be graded, and your report cards will go out at some point in the future. No, just kidding. Thanks for coming. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. The buttons and the stickers are free. All of this, you know, donation to my touring. It's all planned by myself, myself, and I. And yeah, any questions? Please raise hands. And again, I will repeat for the video. Yes.
So many questions on travel one. So how would you define art?
How would I define art? How would I define art? It's interesting. That's a good question. Yeah. What is art? For the book specifically, a lot of the photographs had to either make me ask questions, you know, make like push my curiosity button, or they made me laugh. So you know, so a cowboy riding a bicycle like a Bronco, that's kind of funny, you know. So those are the selection. That was kind of the easy process for editing the book. But I mean, oh man, I mean, I guess we could have a really long conversation about what is art.
As I'm on page 3 and on page in central, like the 1400 block, there's a Banksy, I'm sure of it in their driveway.
Page in central.
Page in central.
It's signed. He did come through. He came through.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a I'm sure it's this. He did the park too, but the park master had it painted over.
If his name is on it, then I would assume that he signed it.
It's horrific.
I haven't actually seen it. Yeah?
The 2 girls kissing with like an orange heart above it.
Oh yeah, I know that piece.
I hope that
Well, you know, I don't. But is that a new one, fresh one?
No, he was in town when it appeared.
So this was like maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
No, he was in town more recently. But,
He just came through town, you say? Oh.
I know his publisher is here in San Francisco.
Oh.
For his books, he comes through here.
Oh, there you go. So there you go. So please, if you see any fresh Banksy work out there, I have an email on my business card. You can submit it. There are 2 girls kissing. It's up on 18th Street too.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's on the sidewalk, which
Yeah, it's on the sidewalk as well.
Really?
In a driveway.
Okay.
I found out Valencia also, that same stencil.
Yeah, 2 girls kissing.
It's in lower 8 also.
But the one that you see has Banksy. It says Banksy.
Yes,
No shit. Banksy doing the sidewalk. How about that? Huh. How about that? when in San Francisco, hit the sidewalks. Any other questions? We'll let him ask one, and then you're next.
Yeah, well, first, San Francisco is having like a big anti-graffiti summit Thursday afternoon. There's a big billboard right near Bimbo's that's promoting that. So it's always sort of surprised me how vehement, most of San Francisco city government is against graffiti when there are so many artists who have come out of the graffiti scene here.
Yeah, so basically what was just said was this Thursday there's an anti-graffiti conference. It's in a hotel downtown somewhere. I've actually considered going, but I don't know. I'm a little concerned that. Yeah, I'm a little concerned about that. But then the second thing that you said was you were very interested. It was interesting to you that the San Francisco government is really against graffiti when so many artists have come out of San Francisco doing graffiti. Yeah.
I think it's actually a lot more than that. In that email that came out about the conference, it stated that the city of San Francisco has apparently a policy of aiming for zero graffiti in the entire
San Francisco has a zero graffiti policy. So.
And this conference is a mechanism what they're trying to figure out how they're going to get to zero graffiti.
Oh, so the conference is trying to figure out how to get the zero graffiti. Let's let someone else speak first. You and then you.
Yeah, so I think my question is, what is stencil art graffiti?
Is stencil art graffiti? That is a good question. Like, I know that I have on my website, I have like a legal category. I call it the legal department. And I do have the San Francisco code, and basically, it's anything done without permission is basically how it boils down to. But is it graffiti? I don't know.
My question was actually for you. You mentioned that there was a billboard stating this anti-graffiti. Where is this billboard?
The billboard was near Bimbo's?
Yeah, it's right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how, well, knowing the ad market right now, it'll probably remain for a while after, but yeah, if you just go to where Bimbo's is, it's like,
On Columbus?
yeah, right near the center.
Okay, so it's on Columbus. You and then you.
I actually, earlier this week, I walked into the California Art Association, whatever that thing is on Van Ness Market, and I don't know what the organization it is, but it's like that official, like, they approve it. Yeah, what is it? Yeah, the Art Commission. Okay, yeah, and in the hallway, I bumped into this guy who like, and I guess he's the director of cultural affairs for Stanford.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he invited me to that thing on Thursday called is it called the Hummel or something? It's got a title.
So it's got a title?
He said that it was actually, he told me that it was a thing for property owners, like landlords and graffiti artists to kind of like figure something out together.
They want the graffiti artists to come?
Well, I asked him if he if he was going to arrest me or something, because I told him I was a graffiti artist, and he was just like, he sounded like it was, I thought it was something that would like give us permission to do murals and things.
So it sounds positive to you as opposed to,
Yeah, well, I mean,
we're still talking about the conference.
Yeah, the conference thing.
Interesting.
I assumed it was.
So the director of the Arts Commission
Well, this lady
invited you.
was in the office. I blurted my thing out on him because I was like, oh, actually, I only wanted to use the bathroom, and since I was in the same building, it was sort of fluky. And anyway, when I left, this lady who worked in the office was like, you don't know who just met. He's never heard. Like, that's amazing. And so I was like, really? Okay, so anyway. But I'm gonna go.
You're going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe if you like stencils and you want to be a proponent of stencils, maybe you should go to this Thursday meeting, this conference. Someone back there had his hand raised? No? Yes?
So I feel like I'm still missing, this is a very basic definitional kind of one-on-one kind of approach. I feel like I'm still missing what exactly is the core here between these terms we're talking about, like stencil, graffiti, street art. Is there something in common? What's the core intent behind it?
So you're asking what is the core intent behind all types of street art, all types of graffiti and street art?
Yeah,
Yeah. Again, it depends on the artist. There really aren't rules, but artists tend to give themselves rules. Like I notice in San Francisco, for the most part, beautifully painted Victorians, for the most part, don't get tagged. Churches tend to not get tagged, but that's just kind of unwritten rule. There are like other people, like 18th Street. I mean, I live in the Mission, so 18th Street, for example, it's people, it's bridge and tunnel. People from all over come to Tartine and come to Delfina and all. So a lot of people want to get up there, want to get up on the walls there, so that all these people will see them. But then a lot of people don't like what's happening on that street, so they put graffiti everywhere for different reasons. So, I mean, one of the core things is there are no rules. One of the things that they have together, though, is it is this kind of the fact that it's free and illegal. It's free art in the street. Most people would probably agree with that. And most people would definitely agree with, at some level, you're doing it to get the rush because it's illegal. I would think. But again, if we had 20 different artists here in the room who did graffiti, they would probably maybe have different reasons. So that's probably a bad answer for that question. Does anybody else have an idea?
Like a voice, you have a voice, you say something. Everybody has a voice.
Yeah, you have a voice, you say something, so everybody has a voice.
Society needs a voice.
Society needs a voice. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's and it's easy, it's easy. Like everybody owns a pencil or a pen, so
it's free.
And it's free. So yeah, so it's easy to if you're pissed off about the war, it's easy to walk around with them. Buy a Sharpie from Walgreens and walk around just writing "No war, no war." So yeah, it's definitely like easy access. I look at it as one thing I see is I look at it as like a historic document. It's like a art document. Because, of course, tagging as we know it, it actually started in like the 1600s. I really wish I had a link to this to the story that I read, but there was a suicide cult going on in the Austrian Empire, and this one guy was part of it, and so you became like known. Your name was known when you killed yourself. That was like you became like this this kind of, I don't know the right word, not a saint, but like people knew who you were. You got respect. So this one guy didn't want to kill himself, so he got a bucket of paint and just went all around Austria painting his name. He got a tagger's name and everything, and he went around Austria painting his name. And he was like, well, I don't want to be known for killing myself. I'll get known for getting up, for putting my name on the wall. There's kind of a common thing to that.
I was just going to comment on that apparently graffiti was popular in Roman times.
That's right, graffiti was Pompeii. They found, yeah, that's where the word came from. Graffiti's Latin word, Latin root.
And then I also saw something about they were exploring the pyramids in Thebes, and they got up into one of the high chambers that had been abandoned, and the stonemasons had carved.
So the stonemasons had like in a pyramid, in the deepest, darkest spot of the pyramid, left their names. They tagged their names.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Lots of hands going up.
I've always thought of it like when you're cutting a stencil I cut them out of polypropylene paper, like plastic. It's not like you're carving plastic, but you're carving your way into immortality. Like that's how I see it.
Cutting a stencil is carving your way into immortality.
Like when people all over the world have your it's like if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, it doesn't matter if you're like some big shot attorney. No one's gonna remember. But if you cut a stencil, like if art is seen, I just think if art is like kept, it's your duty to like share it. If that's what you do.
It's your duty to share art.
Yeah. It's like your job. Like if that's what you're gifted, then you have to. That's what you're put here to do. And like the more people who see it, the more power the art has.
Yeah.
So I'm short.
Yeah. Anybody else? This is fun.
There were a bunch of stencils, especially in the Mission, that did things like I've been waiting my whole life for you. They're mostly
The text stencils were brought up. Emo stencils are calling them? Emo stencils.
I love them, like,
Yeah.
forever.
It's okay to cry here.
Oh my god, I
Yeah.
love those. I love those.
Do you have any idea who did those?
I don't. You know, it's funny. I've had the website for almost 2002, so I've had the website for a while. I've been photographing stencils since 1997, and people are always commenting. One of the questions I get the most are like, "Do you know the person that's doing that stencil?" And most of the time, I don't. And when I had my show in 2003, artists don't. Most of the time, don't introduce themselves. It's a little easier today because. People, there's the whole London style where you put your name on the stencil. So if you're doing a stencil, even if it's illegal, you put your name on it. In San Francisco, most of the stencils don't have their names. So I don't know. And the Strangers, the Strangers when they did their story, I only found them through journalists for the San Francisco Weekly. And they actually had one stencil that had a typo. It had an arrow pointing down 20th Street towards Harrison, and it didn't go anywhere. And so I put it on my website, and they emailed me back. That's the only time they spoke with me. They emailed me back, and they were like, "We fixed that stencil." So of course I rode my bike. I was like, "How do you fix a stencil?" I rode my bike, and they got white spray paint, sprayed the arrow out. It's like, oh, they did. Oh, good. They fixed the typo. Yes.
Russ, I loved your story about the 14-year-old. I'm just wondering if there's a culture of youth coming up that is not afraid of the stuff that will go out and continue that you're seeing.
It's interesting again with the internet, with the fact that everyone has a camera for one thing. I mean, there are literally billions and billions of cameras on the planet now. I mean, just 10, 15 years ago, when I was photographing stencils then, the film development was outrageous. It was so expensive. But now it's you can get a camera for $50. You don't even need a computer. Some cameras you can upload directly to Flickr, straight to Flickr. So because of this, there are just hundreds and thousands of photographs on the internet. And I've found through my website specifically as kids in the middle of nowhere are cutting stencils, in the middle of Iowa. Yeah, in the middle of Idaho, Florida, places that you would think is culturally devoid, absolutely no creativity, and these kids see Banksy and they get the humor, and they're just totally wow, and then they submit to me, they give me their work. So yeah, I do see that, but again with ages, it's really hard to gauge how old people are, especially when you're just doing the pen pal thing through the internet. It's hard to gauge. Yes.
You mentioned earlier Banksy as a way of incorporating the environment or using the environment around
Yes.
the area into his actual message, stencil and everything. I don't know if you're familiar with Ron English, Billboard Liberation in Front.
Oh yeah.
I was wondering, do you have any examples, or have you seen any examples of people using stencils to change a billboard or something like that? I haven't really seen a stencil used in that fashion.
So the question is, do people use stencils to change billboards? They do. I don't know if you came in late, but I do have a photograph in the book of John Fechner, and in 1980 he had stenciled a billboard. Again, usually when you rework billboards, you're doing a wheat paste or like the Billboard Liberation Front. They to get around the damage, the felony charges from damage. They do two-sided tape. And then they actually fax the billboard company how to take it off without damaging it and everything. So that's one way they get around it. And then of course Ron English, God, he's been arrested so many times, and I'm sure his wife has ulcer the size of Cleveland because of it, because he still does it. And again, it's there's this rush of being out on the streets doing stuff like that. But there's not a lot of stencil billboard liberation because again, it's hard to go big. But I've seen people do I do know that people do big murals illegally. They'll do big stencil murals illegally. And there are just different ways to do that. Banksy, some of the stuff he does is huge. And if you look in his books, he's setting it up like a work site, and he's got a work suit on and vest. And they're everybody else has work suits on and vest, and then he does this huge Banksy piece in a tunnel, and then they drive off. And of course people walk up and, oh yeah, we got a permit. Oh, we got a permit. He did big, huge stencils. Yeah, he did his name in a tunnel, and it was broad daylight, and he blocked it off like it was a worker zone.
I heard that the Palestine wall pieces are wheat paste. Like, he does a lot more wheat paste than people are aware of.
I would assume so. Yeah. Probably it's much easier to work in the studio to get like things worked out right, get perspective worked out right, and the pieces that Banksy did on the wall in Palestine were a little more complex, for sure. Because yeah, I mean he had some where like, you know, it was like something down here and then 20 feet up there was something 20 feet up, for example.
I was just going to ask you, I mean, walking around San Francisco, especially downtown, but most of the stencils and stickers that I see, the smaller art pieces, are political or social in
Yeah.
message. And you were mentioning that a lot of the graffiti and street art comes from the hip hop culture, and I was just wondering if you saw more in the stencils coming from a more political, social, you know, message being sent out by people, or is it more of like a
So the question is, are stencils tend to seem more political than other types of graffiti and street art? And the short answer is yes. And the long answer is, again, I think a lot of it has to do with the roots. The more obvious roots are the punk stencils from the punk scene. And then artists in the early 80s like Anton van Dalen, even Eric Drucker, Peter Cooper, Seth de Bachmann. There was even in France in the 60s, pardon my French, Ernst Pignon Ernst. Am I pronouncing that right? Does anybody know? He was like a very respected fine artist in Paris, and when nuclear power was really being shunned, he took photographs of the shadows from Hiroshima, the people that had been evaporated in the shadows, and he made stencils. And he would go up to the nuclear facility, like right up to the nuclear facility, and stencil the silhouettes. And so this was in the 60s, so all these kids in the 70s were just totally inspired. I mean, he was like probably in his 40s or 50s. They were totally inspired by that. So when you talk to artists in France about stencil art, they almost always mention him as a hero because of the political act that he did. So it's just consistent. And I dug, and again, 1934 around there in Argentina was as far back as I could get for the political stuff. But again, all over the place, Chile, Poland, I mean, literally all over the place, people felt the urge to cut out stencils to protest. Anything else? Nothing else? Well, okay. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for the great discussion.